Hello, and apologies that we were unable to provide a podcast last week. Circumstances, as they say, dictated against us. Well, another week, another pronouncement from Donald Trump with its worldwide ramifications, this time announcing plans to impose 100% tariffs to hit non-US film production. So he's going to disrupt another global industry, and in particular the UK. The policy has sparked confusion and concern within the global film industry as the enforcement and the implications of such tariffs remain unclear. This is on top of his executive order directing the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the States to cease all federal funding for National Public Radio, NPR, and the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, which is putting pressure on journalism like never before. So it's timely that this week saw the third Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Summit, Truth Tellers. It was held at Portland Place, just around the corner from the BBC, and brought together some of the biggest names in journalism. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the speakers who chaired a session, Rozina Breen. She's the Chief Executive Officer and Editor-in-Chief of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Rozina joined the Bureau from the BBC, where she held several senior roles, including Head of News at BBC 5 Live. There she oversaw coverage of the EU referendum, the election of Donald Trump, the Grenfell Tower fire, and the terror attacks in London and Manchester. She also launched the DigiHub for the BBC World Service, helping to grow BBC News' digital footprint globally. And she was head of BBC North, which, as I know, can sometimes be a poisoned chalice. Rozina Breen, welcome to the podcast. I want to ask you a little bit later about the organisation you now represent, having left the BBC and being a very senior figure in the news and other areas. But tell me about yesterday. The headline of this great conference, which had people like Mark Thompson and Jeffrey Goldberg and James Carville and a whole range of other people, was rebooting legacy media. Why did people seem to think it needed rebooting?
So yesterday was the third Truth Tellers, the Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Summit, and the broad thematic areas are really about how investigative newsrooms and reporters and news organisations are leaning into the ever-urgent need for investigative reporting. The aim is to inspire, enthuse, share knowledge, come together at a time when, the convening around investigative journalism is super important. So that was a sort of whole ethos of yesterday, and there were a number of panels, one of which included leaders of legacy newsrooms, but others around, for example, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, who talked through the rather remarkable experience he went through in terms of being added to a classified group chat about real-time military.
Oh, yeah, that was the so-called Signal Gate thing, where he suddenly found himself listening to the most, shall we say, intimate details of the military plans of the United States regarding Yemen. And, of course, the White House denied initially this, that and t'other, but, of course, he was telling the truth. I mean, was the over-impression you got that those particularly working in the United States are genuinely scared about doing investigative work? I mean, James Carville, I noticed, said he'd never been more frightened. Is that the impression you got?
Yeah, definitely. I've just returned from the States. I was there last week across Washington, New York, and at Berkeley for the Logan Symposium on Investigative Reporting. And that symposium asked journalists to rate where they were on the DEFCON level of fear in terms of how they feel about being involved or running investigative news outlets in America. And it's really stark. I would say there is a sort of binary approach. One is there is, I think, an acute determination to carry on doing what we do in terms of accountability, truth and transparency. The geopolitical climate has never felt so feral, and our work has never felt more urgent. So there is definitely a determination to do that. And if you look at what's happening, for example, to NPR or PBS in America.
That's National Public Radio.
Yes, and if you think about the attacks on the press, the New York Times, CNN, any public service broadcaster or newsroom, there is a definite antagonism by the White House to that press, if they do not agree with the Trump administration or adhere, that is problematic for them in any number of ways, from either, being shut out of the White House press office, as AP was recently, to, having their sort of tax status looked at.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? Because when I think of people's tax status being looked back, I think back to Al Capone, the great gangster mobster, and that's the way they got him in the end, by investigating his tax returns. And now the suggestion that if you don't agree with what the White House says, or you start to investigate areas they don't want you to get involved in, they'll go after your tax returns. I mean, it is astonishing. This is, as far as one can see from this side of the water, I mean, this administration or regime does operate on the basis of revenge. You offend, you will pay.
Well, there is a definite fear factor, and actually on Alcatraz, I did pay a visit to Alcatraz for the first time last week and saw the, picture of Al Capone, and, I heard that Trump would like to reinstate Alcatraz. Well, let's see if that happens or not. But there is definitely a culture of a sort of autocratic type of politics emerging in America, and what we know is that a free press is absolutely essential and the bedrock of a democratic nation. And once that goes, then what else will follow.
But you've got such difficulty, haven't you? Because at the time if you like, of political attack, you've got the legacy media in real financial difficulty, desperately trying to work out business plans as their audiences move away and increasingly going to social media and elsewhere. So there was always going to be a big crisis about funding investigative journalism. I mean, the term's used too much, but on the whole, it means something like finding out original facts, particularly those things that people don't want you to find out. And that takes time, as you know better than me. It takes time, money, resources, commitment, and organizations that are under great financial pressure. The great temptation will be to cut back. Okay, they'll still do the news, the pictures will be still there. But they will lose control of the agenda because, in a way, they're accepting other people's agenda and not able to say, hold on, here's something we have discovered you need to take into account.
I mean, again, I think there is a sort of mixed portfolio or approach from across the industry as far as I can see. On the one hand, I mean, something that was very tangible at yesterday's Truth Tellers Summit was the spirit of Sir Harry Evans, who said, dig deep, dig deep, dig deeper. I think that is absolutely true. I mean, journalists, we are driven by purpose and value. We feel a sort of moral imperative to shine a light on truth. That's what determines our pathways, our careers, our sort of navigation of the industry. And so I don't think there is anybody in the field or the industry who doesn't feel committed to doing that.
But of course it's challenged because what Trump's administration and people in this country are saying effectively is there isn't a truth. There are truths. And the media is obsessed with a particular truth. Well, we've got other truths. And in the past, it was possible to argue whether, your role and my role in the past would be to establish the facts. And then the politicians can argue about them and what the right policies, whatever, but we would try and establish the facts. It's now being questioned about whether there are such facts and whether you can establish them. And there is this temptation to portray anybody who questions the views of the leadership, shall we say, in this way, as being automatically in opposition to them. So you can see that happening in the States. You find out something uncomfortable with Trump, right, you must be part of the opposition. And so how do journalists keep on not just digging up facts, but refusing to become the opposition to, say, Trump, and try and stay, if you like, somewhere, well, on the side of truth? It's a very tricky, because they will all say you are the opposition. Did you find that sort of tension around when you were there yesterday?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the whole narrative of the Trump administration is fake news. The news outlets that don't agree with him or follow his narrative are lying. We're in this world where people are going to echo chambers. The news industry is fractured and polarized. And so there is an absolute sense that, we are under attack, and anything that we say, if it's fact-based and critical, is not true. So you have to fight for the public's attention. And I mentioned on my panel yesterday that I think, trust in public institutions has never been more fragile, and that's trust in political institutions and trust in media institutions as well. If we don't reflect the nuance of views, if we feel to left of centre or right of centre, it's not going to wash with the public. You know, they want to have increasingly views that sort of support their own frame of reference, their own lived experience. So we have to fight harder.
Just on that point, though, I'd like to pick up with you. The other thing that's going on, it seems to me, is that the commercial success in this country of organisations like GB News and one or two other organisations depends ultimately on persuading the public they can't trust the main broadcasters. They can't trust the BBC. Therefore, as I know sometimes appear on GB News, any bad news, they'll focus on the BBC, and their assumption is you can't trust them. And they do this, well, they've recruited people who obviously believe it, but they do this because their commercial success depends upon diminishing, at the very least, say, the role of the BBC. Now, the BBC is, on the whole, in my view, too scared to talk about that, or too cautious. But this is a commercial reality, isn't it? These organisations will not succeed in the way they want to if the BBC and, to an extent, ITN and Channel 4 News and other such organisations remain powerful and believed in by their audiences.
I would respond in a couple of ways. One is the trust value of BBC News, I think, is the highest in the UK. So the trust value is still there among adults in the UK for BBC News. So we shouldn't underestimate the value and the strength of BBC News. The second is, I think in any news organisation, regardless, you have to serve your audience. And for the BBC, for places like the Bureau, we follow the facts. We don't editorialise. We don't offer opinion. Now, there are some organisations who do that in and amongst their news offer. That's their entitlement to do that. But ultimately, I think if you want trusted, impartial news, you will go to those places to confirm if you, for example, have seen a breaking news alert somewhere on your social. There is evidence to show that people will go to legacy newsrooms like the BBC to verify what they have seen. So I think the trust value is still high. I think we are in a super competitive world where people are vying for subscriptions and numbers in order to be able to sustain. I don't think it's particularly helpful for news organisations to be critical of each other in order to gain audience. I firmly believe in a sort of pluralistic industry.
But it does happen because, diminishing revenues. I mean, we've looked at the way in which YouTube is eating up revenue, advertising revenue. It's extraordinary, just sucking it in there. And therefore, in very difficult circumstances, there's bound to be, well, tightening of belts, but also competitiveness. And the BBC has got this problem. It's always had this problem, hasn't it, when it comes to news? It's had to ride two horses. On the one hand, it's had to deliver to people the news, as it were, that they want, or about the things they care about. But it's also supposed to be setting a standard in public service terms, which says, well, maybe you're not interested in this, but let us tell you this is desperately important. And you've got to balance the two. There's a lot of people who I listen to who think the BBC is leaning a little bit too much towards giving people, as it were, the stories they want. And the other thing that's going on is that they're investing heavily in America because they think there's revenue to be made there, rightly or wrongly, and they have to raise money. But the net result of that is that far too much about the United States in its various forms is in British media, and that what is suffering, therefore, in danger of suffering, is precisely the sort of thing you're involved in and you were involved in, which is local, or local and vocal, as your session was called yesterday. Do you feel that there's a real pressure and problem there about local and regional coverage, that we've got to be careful we're not capable? I'm sorry, I've moved on in a way in the question from one thing to another, but is there a danger that we start to report the world better than we report our own country?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, in terms of the BBC, they are a global news operation that also serves the UK, and there is no doubt that the second Trump administration is having an impact around the world in terms of domestic policies. So there is a need to report on world affairs and to look at what the most powerful nation in the world is doing and how that's affecting citizens domestically. So I think it's an important story to tell. My own perspective about local and vocal and UK output is, I started my contribution to yesterday's panel with a quote by the FBI whistleblower Terry Albury, who I saw at the Logan Symposium last week. And he came out with a line, which was, the fire has always been there. We just haven't been paying attention. And my belief is that there are fires in almost every constituency across the UK right now. And investigative journalism in the UK is much needed. Local accountability has never been more important. One of the stories I was going to relay was around our Thurrock Council investigation, which essentially focused on the misspending or the loss or a gap of £130 million by the local council, which impacted on its local residents. There will be multiple cases of misspending around the country. There will be multiple cases of how climate change is affecting people in inadequate housing. That's the kind of work that we do. And I do sort of think that, in terms of accountability of the new or not so new government, the cost of living crisis, policy change, these are the things that really matter to citizens. I always say politics is about policy and policy is about people.
Well, you were head, I'd say, of the north of the BBC. You ran the newsroom for 5 Live based out of London. You yourself now live out of London in the north, though you work a lot of the time in London. So you're very acutely aware of that. And the question, to me is why do we need the Bureau of Investigative Journalism? You just gave a big defence in a way of the BBC, and you've suggested that isn't this precisely the sort of thing the BBC is doing? So why do we need your bureau as well?
Well, I've talked about the case for local. I haven't sort of qualified whether I think the BBC is doing that well enough or prolifically enough.
Would you like to?
Well, as I said before, I believe in a pluralistic approach. I think there is room for independent newsrooms like ours to absolutely surface the things that we are great at. We have world-class specialisms in climate, in big tech, in anti-corruption, in health and in Bureau Local. So what I would like to see actually are legacy newsrooms working more closely with newsrooms like ours. You referred to my head of news at 5 Live days. I started that job on the week of the EU referendum. It was the busiest time. We had the referendum, we had Brexit, we had 2 elections during my time. We had terror attacks. The daily news agenda has never been so angry. So any day you are looking at a new headline that, in the old days, in our day, perhaps 10, 15 years ago, would have kept you going for weeks, if not months. And now it's story after story. Why I joined the Bureau is I wanted to join a world-class organisation that had the ability to do deep investigations that either took months or in some cases years. And that's what I think is missing in the UK at the moment.
Sorry, you say missing. You think that's missing from the BBC as well? To be fair to the BBC, as we always say, the value of the licence fee has gone down in real terms since 2010 by about 40%. We've seen BBC News having to make cuts around the world. Do you think that the net result of this, therefore, is that it is weak and that it does need to form partnerships, or it has, but should develop partnerships with organisations like yours?
Yeah, I would absolutely support partnerships with organisations like ours because, it's a tough job. And again, going back to the sort of geopolitical climate, the world that we are in, there is just story after story after story. And there has to be a place for deep accountability journalism. And I do believe the BBC does accountability journalism well. But it also requires newsrooms or teams who are able to spend months or years on a story. We're in this world of short-term policy making, sort of very top-line headlines, sound bites. The audiences that we serve deserve long-term, long-form journalism, and that's what we do.
You see, a lot of people would say, I don't want to question what you're doing, I want to ask you a little bit more about it in a minute, but people would say, there's the BBC, it cuts hard talk, which, I was tremendously popular around the world, long extended interview. We heard Jonathan Dimbleby talk to us on the podcast about what he felt was missing. Again, was that long, analysis, interviewing, so you get down to policy. I can't remember, for example, if we're taking reform, any programme that has really looked at reforms policies insofar as they exist in detail and examined them. We are, as you suggest, in this soundbite backwards and forwards. So that calmer, more in-depth look is something that is in danger of being lost. I think somebody at the conference you attended yesterday said, we're good at news, we're not good at meaning-making, by which I think he meant that, great pictures, but do we enhance understanding? I mean, well, how can you do this? I mean, we've talked to, the session yesterday was called, or the conference, Rebooting Legacy Media. One of the big questions was funding. How is it that you're able to carry out what you do? Who funds your centre?
So the Bureau of Investigative Journalism is funded by philanthropy. We're transparent about our funding. On our website, we list the funders, foundations, who support us. We're very transparent and we're clear on our editorial jurisdiction. Funders do not have jurisdiction over the stories that we report on. So they may fund topic areas, for example, climate, global health, family courts, and pushing on transparency in family courts, but they will not dictate what stories we work on, and they will not interfere with our editorial independence. We are really robust. We have very strict editorial guidelines akin to the BBC.
You see, one other thing, but the big thing, of course, they have to do is not expect quick results. I mean, I always find it frustrating when I move from being an editor and so on to being an independent producer. I go to a commissioning editor and say to them, well, I've got this really interesting story here. I can't guarantee but I think this is what we might be able to find out. And if we're very lucky, we might find this. But I can't be sure, but I'll come back and tell you. And they say, but I want to know the result before you've done the work. And you can see their point of view and greater pressure. But, I mean, once you're into the investigative reporting business, you can't guarantee deadlines, can you?
No, not at all. Or indeed the headline. I mean, there are two schools of thought. One is you go into a story knowing what your top line will be. And in any commissioning round that we have, we want an idea of what the top line is going to be. And because we are an impact model newsroom, we also have to identify how is our story going to shift the dial. The other pathway of journalism, investigative journalism, is go into an area and ask the question. When you ask the question, you will understand where the accountability gap is based on the answers that you get. So my type of editorial leadership is more towards the latter, which is we don't always know what's going on. We have to take a punt on where we think there is a potential story. You have to have some leads that take you in that direction or give you the idea in the first place. It may work, it may not. And our Hot Homes investigation, which looked at the impact of poor housing and health inequality, the impact on health inequalities of climate change, was exactly that. We didn't know which way the data would take us. We had an inclination. We knew that the Committee for Climate Change had warned in 2019 that there was no data around what they thought were sort of poor housing conditions. We have to be in that world where we are curious and asking questions and going where our instinct goes. And we are lucky enough not to be a daily publisher that is driven.
Because the other danger is the obvious danger is, if you start off knowing, if you like, what the headline is at the end, you find the evidence to support that and you ignore the evidence, and there may be more evidence that would support an alternative position. And for a newspaper article, often, well, this is my own prejudice, often you only need one source. Right, okay, you've written the headline, then is the source, off you go. The sort of journalism you want to do actually means that you've got to be much more representative, if you like, and therefore this is that balance, isn't it, between sensing or having a bit of information that indicates there is a story there, but going into it not just determined to find one answer and letting the evidence move you. And that is very, 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 very difficult to do, and particularly to do in controversial areas. I mean, I noticed there was at the conference yesterday, there was a session chaired by Michel Hussein about Gaza. My impression, I'm going to be unfair to the BBC here, is that in the past over Ireland, I felt that when it got really hot, the BBC retreated and did on the one hand, on the other. And Gaza has got extremely hot. And the danger is we just say on the one hand or the other. This is one side's view. This is the other side's view. Now, there are particular difficulties because you can't go in and find out from the outside as journalists because Israel will not you in there. But that's another danger, isn't it? That we retreat from subjects that are a bit too hot and organisations focusing on their institutional survival. Gosh, we've got a charter coming up. Oh, we need a licence fee increase. Can we not? Do you have to? Do you really have to? I'm not going to stop you, but do you really have to? Those pressures exist. Do you find, are there any pressures upon you in that way, in your bureau? Or do you really feel that you can tackle any subject, however hot?
I would say that we can tackle any subject, however hot, because we follow the facts. We're really clear that we're not a campaigning or advocacy newsroom. We follow the facts. I have never worked in a newsroom where the fact-check rigour has been so entirely specific and detailed. So any investigation, we will have multiple, sometimes hundreds of footnotes. Every single fact is fact-checked. And so I think we could realistically go into any situation and to be able to offer independent, non-biased news. I mean, going back to your point about single source, I grew up, my journalistic career was sort of born through the sort of BBC days. I'm very much a two-source type of editorial leader. I was there when the two sources came in during that very difficult period, and I think it's the right way to go. I also think organisations, the BBC is in a very difficult place because it's publicly funded, and so it will be under attack from every which way. It can't do right for doing wrong or can't do wrong for doing right. Everybody will have a go at it and accuse it of bias. I do think BBC News pretty much holds a pretty good line. What I am seeing, though, is sort of younger journalists who are coming in who are sort of saying, why are you not taking a view? Why is our newsroom not taking a view? Why are we not articulating the sort of human cost or views about Gaza? I mean, what is happening there is a catastrophe. The nuance of language is also really important, and how to sort of put forward, as a sort of hard news type of operation is, I don't know. I mean, I don't sort of envy news leaders at the BBC. For us, if we are looking at, for example, a health story to come out of Gaza, we will follow the facts based on the evidence that we have in terms of sort of public health. We're not going in like other organisations looking at attacks on either side.
And to be honest, and I don't want to diminish what you do at all, in the eyes of those waging the propaganda war, you are a relatively small fish and the BBC is large, a very big one. And if they can, in the propaganda war, make people suspicious of the BBC's coverage for one side or the other, in their favour, that's a victory. And that's where the attention will be. In a sense, you have it a little bit easier in the sense that you will not be in the forefront of the propagandists' concerns, shall we say.
I would argue that newsrooms like ours are under even more jeopardy. We don't have the framework or the protections of large newsrooms. We are a small organisation, and if our reputation is tarnished or we get something wrong, to refix or address those wrongs is going to take quite a lot of time. So we are super rigorous in our work because we cannot take on board or deal with inaccuracies. Our reputation is based on factual, correct reporting and information that is painstaking and fact-checked and legal. So I would argue that, in this current climate, any newsroom is under fire or under scrutiny for whatever they put out. So I think, we kind of tread lightly but boldly and courageously in our reporting. And if we were to report on any conflict, we report on transparency and the flow of dirty money through London. We went through a High Court case that took 2.5 years and cost quite a lot of money. We were sued by the subject of a story. That case was settled. Our article remained up, which tells you which way that case went. But, we are a small organisation who is constantly fundraising to do the kind of work that we do. We don't have big bucks in the bank for litigation. So I would probably sort of disagree with your comment about that. The fact is we don't do daily news, and that in a way is some kind of respite, but we do go at pretty big stories.
Finally, you've done some very tough jobs. Being responsible for... I was never directly responsible for a newsroom. It would have been a nightmare to me. You're never on holiday and you're never off. You're always working. And then you've run BBC North, and I've had a little bit of experience of that, and that's full of, people in Cumberland can't stand people in other parts of Cumberland, let alone in other counties or whatever. You got all that. So you've reached a stage in life you could have retired or semi-retired, done something different, been a bit more relaxed, and lo and behold, you put yourself in this job, which is one of the toughest, as far as I can see, around. Why? Did you not think, I need a break from news and all of that journalism? I'll go and, go around the world for a couple of years.
That's a very good question. I probably refer to one of my earlier answers, which if journalism, public interest journalism, is in your DNA, that's a very hard thing to extricate oneself from. When I was going for this job, my husband was saying, really, do you really want to do that? You're going to be paid less and you're going to have more pressure. And it's a big gig. I wanted the big gig. I wanted the stretch. I want to lead a newsroom that has purpose and determination. I love editorial leadership. I'm passionate about journalism. I think the world needs more of it. I'm looking forward to whatever comes next, whenever it comes next. I'm not ready to slow down.
Well, I'm delighted. A lot of people will be delighted for that. And if people want to find out more about your organisation, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, obviously they go to the website. So on any other ideas about ways you would like them to contact you?
Well, if they could visit our website, that would be amazing. They can also support us by becoming a Bureau Insider, which is our membership programme, and they can also sign up to our weekly newsletters. One is called Uncovered, which is about our investigations every week, and the second newsletter is called The Spark, which essentially is about how journalism is a force for good. So they could support us either by signing up to the newsletter, by giving us a tenner a month would be great, and just visiting the website to check out our work. I think those three things would go a long way.
Well, I hope a lot of people listening do, and will take heed. Rozina Breen, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Rozina Breen, Chief Executive Officer and Editor-in-Chief of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. By the way, if you want to take part in the BBC's consultation exercise, Terry Pearson, who's one of our regular listeners, points out that there are a lot of people without the internet, so how are they going to participate in, as he says, the biggest ever BBC survey, their quote? Well, he's found out for us. You can phone Audience Services, that's 03700 100 222, and we are promised one of the team will help you. So that's the number again. If you want to contribute to the BBC survey and you're not online, what you do is phone Audience Services 03700 100 222, and one of the team will help you. Thanks very much, Terry. Now, if you're enjoying our journalism, please do support us for less than the price of a cup of coffee per month. You can do this by either one-off payment on our crowdfunding page or regularly by signing up to patreon.com/BeebWatch for £1.99 per month. You're going to get half a cappuccino for that. By signing up to Patreon, this will also entitle you to my weekly blog, which gives my take on the week's interview. And the link to this and our crowdfunding page can be found in the description of this programme. That's all for this week. And as you probably know, this podcast is presented by me, Roger Bolton, and it's produced by Kate Dixon. The sound is by Dave Kitto, and special thanks to Quinn Genty. It's a Good Egg production. Until next time, goodbye.